Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Last time it was mostly me doing the talking about unit tests and integration tests. So now we'd like to focus on Mykola's side and hear what he has to say on this angle. So because I was saying it's important to focus on unit test, but you really think that focusing on the integration tests can be a better solution. Um, why exactly?
Yes, there are multiple reasons. I think the most important for me is like real life situations, like stories from the trenches. What you find usually when you go into and have some service, some code base, average code base. Most of the time, the unit tests will be brittle, heavily mocked, and not bringing that much of a value, more like going against your changes. Whereas integration tests, and I saw that many times that eventually, especially when you're starting to have many changes and you need to rely on your tests, then you naturally go to the integration test, to the integration layer. We can argue that maybe there are ways to work this around, but without specific goals to maintain those unit tests, I think the integration level is the safe bet where you get the best of both worlds. Gives you confidence, it doesn't make your changes difficult, and it's a little bit easier, I think, to write integration tests or like high level tests in the way that they help more.
Right. So basically, what I hear you say is that it's easier to get integration tests right.
It can be, yes, I think it's easier. Part of that is that they don't rely on the structure of your code, which is a downside you mentioned in your turn, that you are
Yes.
not driven to refactor your code. And we can,
Yeah.
I think we can both agree that heavily mocked tests are probably the worst of both worlds. So we might
Yeah. Definitely.
take them outside of our equation for now. Even though most of the time I see unit tests, they will be heavily mocked. But let's take this away. Let's agree we want to have good tests. We want to have healthy tests, not like mechanical, but really giving us the value. And I think with the modern tools that we have, with the modern way to structure the application, like in Java world, you have lots of Spring utilities. You have Docker that helps you to run your database, so you don't care how many things you have to write in between, or you can have your messaging system in between, and you don't care that some function you need to send internal message. Those are the noise things, the implementation details. Well, depending on your level. And I think in this situation, it's easier if you follow again good practices of writing tests to have an integration test. And then as a next step, maybe you can say, okay, now I want to go down and have refactor my code how I want. But that's already optional. It's great when your code structure is driven by tests, but it's a level higher. And in some situations, it can become a little bit of the um, art, if you want to say it.
Right. So you're saying the improvements only become academic.
No, I'm not saying that it's academic. It's more difficult to achieve, and
Right.
depends also on the
Okay.
team, how the people you are working with views. Is it important for them? Is everybody on the same way how you need to structure the code? Because you will need to change in structure of the code, and that's why for me it's easy to start on the higher level, because then it's not that demanding on how you structure your code. You will still want to structure your code well, but you're not driven necessarily by the tests. You may use them, but that's an option.
Right. Yeah. So another downside that we haven't spoke about in this side is that your integration tests will be slower than your unit tests. Um, so as soon as you come to a significant amount of them, that will become a blocker in running your tests. Um,
Yes.
so how do you factor that into this equation?
Well, I think the important thing is they don't have to be very slow. They will definitely be slower, but they don't have to be very much slow if you put a little bit effort and if you put it as a priority. What we often see in the Spring world, Java Spring, that when we are starting to write integration tests, we are without much thought adding dirtiest context, different configuration for tests. Those things can really get in very quickly in your way because you will be paying high price for starting the whole application or a slice of your application, which is also extra complexity. And yes, then it will be quickly problematic. But I think if we have focus on integration tests, we can have them quick enough. And also, again, when we're talking about those integration tests, like higher level tests, they don't necessarily have to go all the way to the end-to-end of your component. They can select or system. They can be selective. The important thing is that the sensitive piece of functionality is covered by one test. And that's, I think, also a little bit related to your idea, our goal, very paramount goal, that we want to refactor our code so that it's easy to test that the same ideally sensible, meaningful piece of functionality with a unit test. But in my practice, or in my experience, it's often good, but not always easy. And sometimes has its own downsides, those refactoring. But okay, maybe I'm running a little bit too far.
No, I think I see where you're going. Because you're saying since your integration tests align better to the actual value that you're going to deliver, testing there will give you more freedom to experiment with how you deliver that value.
Yes, in a sense. You can even have completely stupid code, very straightforward and naive and not very well structured, but it will work and you will have something that will help you working with it. Or you can go some way and then say, you can go, for example, very common way of structuring such code for tests, especially for unit tests, is hexagonal architecture or something. You might want to go that, but then you will find that it's not working for you either because it's too difficult for you personally or because you have slightly different setup of your service that just goes away. It doesn't matter if your tests are focused on the middle level. You have the freedom.
Yeah.
Also in future refactoring. I think most of the time, if you can have very good and meaningful unit tests, that will probably be better even than the integration tests. It's just that it's not that straightforward. And I don't think that for every service, we're talking about enterprise services, microservice architecture. I think 80% of the services really don't worth investing much into building them perfectly, necessarily putting as a goal to reach this paramount of TDD. Unless you can do that naturally.
That is also an interesting angle, because now you're talking about what is the quality requirement of a tiny component in a SOA landscape, like a microservice. And maybe we've now reached a subject that could be a really good discussion of a next discussion. So thanks a lot, I think, for your view. And I think we also touched hexagonal design there. But I really think we're discussing an interesting balance here, and I'm really excited to see what future discussions will bring.
Yes. And that was the end of part 2 in our discussion of unit versus integration tests. Stay tuned for the part 3, the wrap-up. Ciao!